Hey guys, it's Ted Bogert with the Ted Show. We are live. We are finally doing it. I don't know if it's the third or fourth attempt, but Carol Wick and myself were determined to get this. We've been friends for a long while, and I just thought it would be so great to have her on the show. Great topic, nonprofits, foundations, just so much going on in our world as we speak. But welcome to the show and tell us a little bit about you. Enough about me chit-chatting, Carol.
Yeah, I think this is the third time. I mean, we were having some technical difficulties and then other things happened. And so, yeah, thank you so much for being persistent and having me on. I really appreciate it.
I'm honored to have you on. I'm excited.
So I have been in the nonprofit sector my entire career. I started out as a child trauma therapist working with sexually abused children, and eventually ran a juvenile justice program for girls for 13 years, Pace Center for Girls. You may have heard of it. And then
Absolutely.
Fabulous program. And then ran Harbor House of Central Florida for a decade, completely rebuilt it from the ground up, added a kennel, a new shelters, a daycare center, and then started my own company 4 years ago. So I now oversee a global network of former nonprofit executives. All of my Sharity experts are folks, some of them you may know, some of them you don't, because they're from literally all over the globe. And if you need an expert, that's what Sharity has. We have the best of the best. They specialize in their favorite things to do, which makes working together just an absolute joy. And we help nonprofits build capacity and shift from just that day-to-day struggle of annual fundraising, special events, things like that, especially now, don't work anymore, and move into major gifts and stabilizing their organizations for the long term.
So I have many questions. Shirley Stamper is sending you out a ton of love, so I at least have to acknowledge Miss Shirley Stamper. She's amazing. So what did you want to be when you grew up, though? My master's degree is in health care with a focus on nonprofits. Obviously, that would have never been what I thought I wanted to do. So what did you want to do, and how did you get led to the nonprofit world?
So it's actually a little interesting, fun story. I had decided when I was in elementary school that I was going to be a pediatrician, and I was headed to medical school. In fact, I got accepted to a 6-year program at Boston College when they first came out in the 80s, and I couldn't afford it. Did not come from a family that had great wealth, so ended up at Florida State and pre-med, and decided to work at a hospital just to make sure it was what I really wanted to do. Because I had an uncle at the time that said, you know, the profession is changing. It may not be what you think it is. And so I became an orderly at Orlando, what then was Orlando Regional Medical Center, before Arnold Palmer was built, back when it was, you know, basically the old county hospital. And I was calling patients and who were alive and not around the hospital, and fell in love with the psychiatric patients and loved working with them and transporting them. And I was so good with them that, and the grieving families, that they kept calling me in to work with them. And so I went back to school next fall, and I changed my major. So I actually am like one credit away from a minor in chemistry.
Wow.
But changed my major and became a family therapist. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I actually started out, my first job was doing in-home family therapy for family preservation for child welfare in the state of North Carolina, and doing private practice work with children and adults who had been sexually abused. So,
wow. So how do you move to a specific type of practice to an all-encompassing nonprofit guru and goddess like you are right now?
Well, I fell in love when I was up in North Carolina with, and in grad school. I was really, really fortunate to go to a program that was cutting edge, and at Auburn, Alabama, believe it or not, Auburn University, first family therapy, systemic family therapy training programs in the country, and they only took 6 students a year. So I was really fortunate to get into that. But they taught me about community engagement and the power of systemic change. And so that became my passion. So I moved back to Florida, took a job running a multi-system child abuse network, and doing change work with that, and just realized that's the path I wanted to be on. And I'm really fortunate now. That's what I do with a lot of my clients. So I'm actually doing second webinar for the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, based on a study that I did, looking at estimating the economic impact of domestic violence and domestic violence programming on a community. And I'm working with a program in Africa to do a replication project that will be literally will go global and be presented to the UN. So I get to do really exciting, systemic changing kinds of things. And that's what I did at Harbor House. I did a lot of work when I was at PACE in girls' prisons, did a lot of national research with them, and a lot of change systemically in the prisons, but I wanted to do more. And so at Harbor House, we were able to really build these amazing models that I'm actually going to be doing some work and helping to modify and replicate in the child welfare system in the coming months, which I'm very excited about. So
there's so much of a need in general, and then there's so much of a need for what you're doing, because as you mentioned earlier, the nonprofits, I think a lot of people forgot that nonprofits were dramatically impacted by the shutdown, because the shutdown came during what I always used to call the spring gala season. Yep. Fundraisers before everybody went off for the summer, when their kids got out of school. There were just so many different events, and when you're planning on those events, and those events are like a giant chunk of the money that you raise every year, having that eradicated was incredibly detrimental to the budgeting and figuring it out. Because remember, guys, the services that are needed don't go away. Right. The people needing the service don't go away. So just because you're shut down and it's a pandemic doesn't mean all of these services that these different nonprofits provide, they have to go on. These people still have a need. Right. And of course, more people were impacted mental health wise by COVID. And so, all right, so let's talk about specifically what you do with Sharity Global. You mentioned it a little bit, but I love the concept, and I love the fact that you've taken, in my opinion, all of your worldly knowledge and put it here for its best use. So talk a little bit about Sharity Global.
So what I found out was, I love the systemic work. And what I found when I started doing the for-profit consulting for nonprofits was that there are a lot of nonprofits that pay tons of money, and I mean tens of thousands of dollars, to consultants, and they were completely being taken. I mean, not necessarily deliberately, but what was happening is they were paying $15,000 for a development assessment to get this report that didn't tell them how to fix anything, or they were paying $20,000 to $50,000 for a feasibility study, when I was looking at it and saying, I can tell you in 10 minutes what this is going to say. Why would you pay me this money? And I couldn't ethically. I just have this, like, my ethics are like off the chart. I can't do this anymore. I cannot sell these products to these nonprofits. So I thought, well, let me see if I can train college students. So I had a friend of mine who's a professor at Rollins, gave me her senior level entrepreneurial class. And I said, let me see if I can train them how to assess this. And what I found was they can't. That it comes from having a lot of experience and having been there and done the work. It just kind of comes naturally because you've made the mistakes and you've screwed things up and you've learned, right? So that's where I came to this idea that I needed to just hire people who had been successful in their careers, who were now, most of them either retired or semi-retired, and they wanted 2 or 3 gigs a year. That's it. They didn't want to set their own website. They didn't want to go out and do their own lead generation. And sometimes you have these projects where you can pull 3 or 4 of these people in and create these really amazing dynamic teams that could do real transformative work. So that's what I did. And so I have just the most amazing, amazing group of people that work for Sharity, that you can come in and you name it, we probably have an expert that can help you, from planned giving to accounting, major gifts, or even just government relations, you name it. We probably have somebody. We have someone who was at the Disney Institute, and you can go on our site. We're providing lots and lots of free resources on how to do really simple things that you shouldn't actually be paying a consultant for anyway. So we want to be able to create this resource that's easy to use to help you solve most of your problems. But we start out with an assessment. And so all those questions that I was internally asking myself, when I went and I did these assessments and said, you don't need to be paying a consultant, here's the answer, that assessment's free on our site. So we have several of them, and you get free reports, and then that will tell you what you really need to work on, so that when a donor comes and looks at you, you have the internal capacity, but you also have the things in place to be able to ask them for money, that when they vet you, you're going to pass that process.
Let me ask you, obviously we were talking COVID made such an impact on nonprofits. And so, but I think that the systems in place for a lot of nonprofits are antiquated, and they hadn't gotten out of that way of fundraising and bringing awareness prior to COVID. So COVID has been an incredible struggle for them. They're having to learn how to interact and engage with donors via Zoom or via StreamYard or via whatever your platform is. FaceTime, a lot of things that were uncomfortable. And coming from that industry, I know that a lot of the executive directors, a lot of the people are so programmatic driven that the business side of it can be a challenge. And so now it's even more of a challenge because nobody was stroking any checks during that time because they didn't know what their future held. So now that we're kind of coming on the outside of that, what are some of the suggestions you can give nonprofits and foundations to, all right, guys, here it is. It's starting to open up. Here's what I think you should do.
So the first thing is there's lots of money out there. And the nonprofits that did not stop asking had better months in April than they've had year over year for the past few years. I'm hearing that consistently. If you didn't ask, you're probably sitting there asking how you're going to make payroll, and the rest of them are all just literally rolling in money. It's amazing. Like many of my clients are 2 and 3 times what they normally raise in April with special events and everything. So the money's there, and a lot of people are afraid that there are a lot of people that are out of work and things like that. These are not your major givers, folks. This is not where you're going to go and get the large gifts from. Those are your clients. And so what I'm telling them is you have to be prepared. And what most nonprofits fail to do is they have a strategic plan sometimes, but it's internally focused. And they have to start thinking about their plan like an entrepreneur looks at their pitch deck when they're going to pitch to a venture capitalist. You have to have that kind of plan. It has to say, what is the problem you're trying to solve? How are you going to fix it? How much is it going to cost to fix it? And that's not a 1-year budget, that's a multi-year budget. Do you have the team? What's the team look like? Are they able to pull this off? And who else is on board? I mean, it's that simple, but you'd be amazed how many nonprofits I go into that absolutely do not have a multi-year plan in place where it says, if you give us this much money, here's what we will accomplish. And then are able to actually give outcomes, not outputs. And when I That's the other thing that I love doing with nonprofits is most of them talk in outputs. And if you can count it on your fingers, it's an output. An outcome is what happens because someone came to your program. How was their life transformed? And you need to be able to tell that story. And I always say, if I am someone and I am coming to your program and I have a choice of multiple programs to help me, why should I choose you? And if you can't explain it to me, the client, you're not going to be able to explain it to a donor. So how is my life going to be transformed because I come into contact with your staff and your programs? I don't care what your programs are. I just want to know how my life's going to be transformed. And that's the story nonprofits have to tell in this post-COVID environment.
Why is it that you think they struggle with that? And I think that's been a universal struggle for a lot of nonprofits, and then COVID just exacerbated it. So why is it a struggle to be able to communicate that to somebody who would need to hear it?
Well, I think it's very simple. I think, first of all, most grants required outputs. And so their outcomes were defined by what grants were asking for. And they don't think about how major donors think. They think about how the numbers that they've had to churn through. And so they actually will say, we sheltered this many people, or we fed this, gave away this many pounds of food. And they think that's an outcome, and it's not. And they haven't stepped back and said, why do we do what we do? They keep saying what we do, not why we do it. And it really is different. And it's something that they've not really ever been forced to do before, but the time has come, and you're going to start seeing nonprofits go under and not understand why they get passed over. And it's really, and I mean, it's sometimes more complicated. Ultimately, this is why. They're also going to be looking for your current financials to see whether or not you're going to be alive next month. But really, you can't say, I'm going to take this $60,000. I'm going to take this $100,000, and here's how I'm going to solve the problem with it. We as consumers would never buy a product if we didn't think it was going to fix the problem that we had. And donors are going to be that selective in the future, and they don't want to know just how many people you serve. They want to know how many lives you changed.
And rightly so, because there are, like you said, so many choices out there. One of the things that I found fascinating when all of this, when it became apparent that the shutdown was real, because I was like the rest of a lot of people who didn't believe we were actually going to be secluded or quarantined. I remember immediately going out to the restaurant industry and the nonprofit industry and said, listen, you all come on the show. We'll do 15 shows a day if we have to. Let's create something that is different than what you're doing and utilize it on your social media platform. Blah, blah, blah. The business owners, it was unending. The people who have owned restaurants, who were in that mindset of owning a business. Mm-hmm. The nonprofits, crickets, 100% crickets. And I think a lot of that has to do with, well, that sounds like a good offer, but how is that? I think they're thinking in output versus outcome.
Right.
And so that's fantastic. I mean, such a great analogy there. But I feel like that is where they need to begin to focus, think differently. By the way, you have lots of, I'm not ignoring you, Janet or Jacqueline, lots of love, and Carol and I will both answer your questions and comments later. But I feel like nonprofits just don't know how to think differently. It's like this same board members over and over again. It's this staleness that COVID, you're either in or you're out at this point. And I think what you said is so valuable.
Well, and I think that's why I'm encouraging people to go on my site, take the assessments, because it will tell you really quickly where you need to get help. And then we've got some free tools, podcasts, videos, things like that. Or you can ask us, you say, hey, I need help figuring out how to solve this, and we'll create a video for you, because we're still in that mode. I can ask one of my experts to do that for you. If you aren't shifting and starting to talk about what you're going to do with the money, how much what you're doing is going to cost, and what you're going to do with it, and how it's going to change lives, or the environment, or whatever else it is, you might as well close your doors. I mean, I really firmly believe that. And that's why I just love doing impact work with nonprofits, because you will see almost instantaneously a change in the response of your donors when you start talking outcomes. I mean, literally, almost instantaneously, you'll see them go, oh, "Wow, really?" And I've literally seen $1 million checks be written in meetings.
That's why the asks, the old days when we had asks, when you would go to a luncheon or a breakfast, or I would do a tour when I toured Pace. You want that person to see the impact, to feel it, to hear it. And I don't want to look at a graph to know it. I need to understand it, and I need to intrinsically get it. And I think that a lot of nonprofits don't understand how powerful that is. I mean, when I'm crying, I'm cutting any check. I mean, when you go to breakfast in the morning before I had enough cocktails, quote unquote, it's like, of course I'm going to give you money. You just made me cry or emote or feel, but you could see the impact on that individual's life and the life of their family, whatever it was. And it was just, you're absolutely right. So I had a question prior to going live about money. And so the question was, is it still grant season? Are there still grants out there? Is there still money being given?
Yes.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about that?
So, okay, first of all, most foundations have thrown their grant cycles out the window. So if you have funders that you know that have given to you in the past, something like, you should be communicating with them, because a lot of them have opened up COVID-related funding cycles. Some of them have completely shifted their strategy. Now is the time to be picking up the phone, having a conversation, telling them what your plan is, how much money you're going to be looking for, and sharing that strategy with them. I strongly encourage you not to pick up the phone and call them until you have a plan to share, but you need to be touching base with folks. The other thing is, there's a large group of very wealthy, influential philanthropists pushing Congress to force foundations and donor advised funds to have to give at least 5 to 10% additional to nonprofits, which would pump about $225 billion into the nonprofit sector in the next 9 months. If you are not ready, prepared, and able to communicate how you could use money, you will be left behind, because donor advised funds are not required to be given out yet. And so this would force a lot of money into the nonprofit sector. So you want to make sure that you're out there communicating, having that conversation with the impact. So yes, there's money, there's grants. And at Sharity, we can actually we partner with iWave, and so we can actually run a list of foundations for you. But I strongly encourage people to look internally before they look externally for new donors, because oftentimes I go in, I do donor evaluations, scan for clients, and we find that there are millions of dollars worth of major gifts available, and current people who are currently funding you just haven't asked because you didn't know they could give that amount.
Correct. And I feel like there's so much of an opportunity to grow with all of this. We'll have galas again, and there's some of those are being talked about, not going in the fall. And so everything's up in the air. Well, you have this amazing tool in front of you that all of us have had to really kind of learn how to work, your computer, your phone, and the amount of business, the amount of opportunity that you can do. I was invited to an online gala, and I have to tell you that they thought it out so beautifully. And all I wanted to do was attend that gala. I got what I wanted. I loved every second, and I heard the story where I cried. I gave the money, and then I was in and out, right? So there's an advantage there, because guess what? You didn't have to rent a hotel room. Right. You didn't have to figure out all of that stuff. You just had people who already loved. Why? They could see the impact. They had already been there. These people wanted to be involved. So like Carol said, if you are not ready for this, you got to be ready for your why. I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. All right. So before I ask every guest this, what have you done personally to stay creative and positive and hopeful during the quarantine?
Oh goodness. It's been tough. The whole pandemic for me has been kind of life altering in a lot of ways. I started out the beginning of it not well. I actually caught not COVID, but something else, and had to get over that bug, and then had some personal family challenges that we had to overcome. So it's been something where, from a mental health perspective, I've really needed to make sure that I have stayed very positive. I have done two things. One, I have a rescue dog, Leo, and if anybody follows me on Facebook or Instagram, you know Leo.
Right.
Leo and I have taken to daily walks, and not that we didn't walk a lot before, but he loves to run around the backyard. And I have been growing my garden. I have a Fleet farming food forest in my backyard. And
I love it.
really been cultivating that. So Leo and I go out a couple times a day to the Fleet farming area of my yard, and that I unfortunately am sharing with squirrels because I haven't managed to harvest much of anything the squirrels tend to get before I do. But that has kept me, I think, kind of sane. And I love being outdoors, and but needing to get away from the computer and get out into either the park with him or into my Fleet farming forest. Say that. Has really kept me sane. I do art too, but I haven't had time to pull out all my stuff and do that. But
see, even someone who has is busy as you've taken time, which is really what this reset has been all about. Hopefully, you have lots of love up and down here. And again, guys, if you came in late, I promise Carol will go back through and say hi to everybody. All right, so the best way to reach you is
Carol.wick@charityglobal.com, and that's SHARITY global.com, scrolling across the bottom there. Yeah, reach out, shoot me an email. I'd love to chat with you. If you go to my website, charityglobal.com, you can also hit the contact and reach out to me. And our 800 number is there as well, so feel free to give me a call. I'd love to talk to everybody. And hi, everybody who's saying hello in the chat.
All right, you're a joy. We did it.
Yay!
We did it. We finally did it. Carol, you're amazing. Thank you for all of the work that you do in our community to make our world a better place. It's awesome what Sharity Global is doing. And of course, what you did before. I know you've just made a big impact on our world. So thank you. All right, guys, reach out to Carol Wick, charityglobal.com. We'll see you back here, I think, a little later on today. But I love each and every one of you, and I will also respond to all of your comments. Thanks, guys. Have a great one. Mwah.